So next up we have Susan Roberts. So Sue has several appointments across Tufts University. She's a senior scientist in the Jean Mayer USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, the HNRCA. She's a professor of nutrition in the Gerald J. and Dorothy R. Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. And she's also a professor of psychiatry and a senior staff member in pediatrics at the School of Medicine. Sue's published more than 200 research papers, including the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. She works in a number of areas, including dietary, behavioral, and cultural determinants of body fatness, and development of behavioral programs for weight loss and the prevention of weight regain. So in the strategic plan, Tufts the Next 10 Years, T10, we have 4 themes. That 4th theme is creating innovative approaches to local and global challenges. And it's hard to think of people whose work better epitomizes that theme than the work of Sue Roberts, and you're going to understand why after hearing her speak. Sue?
I've never been to one of these talks, and it's a pretty amazing experience to stand up here and see a whole room of Tufts people in my second favorite city in the world, the first being Boston, of course. And I'm excited to be here because I think we're making some really major breakthroughs in 2 different areas which have been resistant and completely stagnant to progress for a few decades. And that progress is for 2 reasons, which I want to mention up front. One is because Tufts Nutrition is the most amazing place to work. I don't think there's anywhere like it in the world for energy level, for team spirit, for the broad range of things that people do that you can always go down the hall and ask something about, something that you've got no idea at, and somebody will stop and you'll have a coffee and you can make connections. It's really great for that. And the other reason is that we're really taking advantage of that. Our work incorporates bench-side and clinical science and behavioral science all in one package. So let's start with our work on malnutrition, which is quite recent. It's a huge problem, obviously. There's at least 200 million children today who are suffering from malnutrition. And many of those are in Africa, where I worked a long time ago. But the thing about malnutrition is we're actually very good at keeping these kids alive. It's quite rare these days for children to die of malnutrition. But what happens is they come out of it permanently impaired. They have cognitive damage, they have health problems, their muscles are weak, they have low work productivity. They are kind of damaged human beings, if you like. And it's a terrible thing to be keeping them alive with all of that damage. So we've been asking a very simple question, which is, can we do better? And my work started quite recently in malnutrition. In fact, it was in 2012 when I got a call from someone who needed a clinical trial set up in Guinea-Bissau. And the first thing I had to do is look up where Guinea-Bissau was, because I didn't even know. It's a tiny little country in West Africa with just 1.7 million people, and it's the 11th poorest country in the world. So there's a lot of malnutrition. And we did these trials. We set them up. It was testing a new kind of aid food. And like all other aid foods, it didn't work very well, but the new one worked very slightly better. But I came out of that work with really 2 defining thoughts. The first one was, I would never feed those foods to my kid. They are packed full of sugar, packed full of oil. They have a small amount of low-grade protein, and they use synthetic vitamins and minerals to make up the difference. I don't think there's anybody in this room who would think that that was a good diet for their children. The second defining thought I had was that the humanitarian aid field is almost in the dark ages of nutrition. There's been so much important progress made in so many areas of nutrition that was simply missing from those formulations. We know a lot about nutrients for neurogenesis, nutrients for myelination, nutrients for reducing inflammation in the brain so that recovery can take place. I beg your pardon. We know that stem cells are in the brain, that you can get recovery if you have the right conditions. So what we did was we tried our hands at designing a new formulation which packaged together all of the nutrients and foods that we know are good for brain health. We optimized it for cognitive repair specifically. There was 5 nutrients missing from the formulations of the WHO that should have really been there. And the next thing we did was pilot testing. Pilot testing is quite complicated in Guinea-Bissau because you have to go through the IRBs, the Institutional Review Boards for Bissau, obviously, as well as Tuffs. But we did that, and we have ongoing studies in Boston as well now. And I'm going to show you what our results in Guinea-Bissau are. These are the kind of villages where we work. They're dirt roads, there's no electricity, there's no running water. People farm the land and they eat the food. They grow rushes, which become roofs, and they're about 99% illiterate. We ended up founding a school in one of the villages, and today we have more than 200 children receiving elementary education there, which has given us a very special relationship with the community. When we do our supplement studies, we started with local ingredients to the extent we could. We trained up local bakers to bake what's effectively a cookie, so we could bring some extra income into the village. And that worked really well. And this is what my day looks like when I go out to Guinea-Bissau. We stay in a small hotel in a local village, and we load up a Land Rover, and we do all of the measurements in the village. So we measure stunting, immunity, anemia, things like that. We also have been collaborating with Tufts psychologists to do state-of-the-art cognitive testing. In this particular test, the kids have to put the mommy animal in the mommy box and the baby animal in the baby box, and we count how many things they get right. So in our pilot test, which we just finished this summer, we had statistically improved executive function in our intervention group compared with our controls. It was a huge effect. They got 50% right versus only 1 in 8 right. It was a huge effect. And that occurred after just 11 weeks. So I have to admit, the first thing that happened when I got this result is I cried. I mean, it's just such an amazing result, such a transformational thing. And the second thing I did was I didn't tell anybody for 2 days because I wanted to kind of think it through and, you know, explore my own feelings about this really potentially game-changing thing. I should also say that these results are independent of, you know, what I was personally doing at the psychologist coded the tapes blinded before we had released the randomization. So there was no, you know, kind of chance that this was an error, if you like. We also took a brain scanner out to Guinea-Bissau, and we did the first measurements of brain blood flow in the village with a generator. And we saw a significant relationship between our executive function scores and our brain blood flow, which is great because executive function is really hard to measure, and brain blood flow takes about 10 seconds. So it's really going to transform our ability to work there in the future. Our conclusion coming out of this is that neurologically focused foods do appear to reverse cognitive damage. There's nothing like that has ever been published before, and that these transformational changes can occur quickly. All right, flip to obesity. And you know, why in the world is somebody studying obesity as well as malnutrition? Well, it's another huge problem. There's also incredibly ineffective treatments. Obesity statistics get worse every year in America and almost every country in the world. And that's where my comfort level is as a scientist, trying to tackle the biggest, toughest problems. There's also a lot of synergy between the research measurements. So, you know, I actually get quite a lot of scientific benefit from doing both sides of the equation. And on a personal level, I was 50 pounds heavier than I am today about 20 years ago. So I bring a lot of personal investment to this topic. These are today's weight recommendations by the government from the US Dietary Guidelines, and they haven't changed for about 30 years. You're supposed to eat less, exercise more, and use your willpower to face down temptation. And there's a really simple reason for why this doesn't work. If this is the brain, and those little squares are the 3 feeding centers in the brain in approximately the right place, 2 of those, the reward center and the hunger center, are down in the unconscious brain. So willpower, by definition, is the conscious control of conscious processes. So if you're hungry, if you're craving of food, you can't just tell it to go away by using your willpower, because willpower really doesn't get down that far. Another way of saying this is that today's recommendations ignore basic principles of neurobiology. So we decided to start from scratch and try and rethink the whole concept of weight regulation. And where I started was to say, okay, what do all scientists agree on? Nutrition's an incredibly controversial field. There's so many things which people continue to argue about. And I said, let's get rid of that stuff and find the things where everybody agrees, because if you can get the same result in different labs with different protocols, those are very resilient findings which would be easy to implement in an intervention. And here's what we found. They're very simple things, but they built a very strong foundation. The first is, if people are hungry, they want to eat, duh, okay. But so there's four ways that dietary composition can influence that. High protein diets, high fiber diets, low glycemic index diets, and high volume diets are all effective for suppressing hunger and inducing feelings of fullness and satiety. And all studies show that, meal-to-meal studies. So that's very resilient data. There's also full agreement on the fact that if there's more food available, we eat it. We eat more outside of awareness. There's also agreement on the fact that high-calorie foods taste better. Nobody craves dry iceberg lettuce. Nobody does. They crave chips. They crave French fries. They crave chocolate. They crave ice cream. In Scotland, they crave deep-fried Mars bars. But all of those things are high in calories. The other 2 things that push our buttons when it comes to food are variety and familiarity. We like familiar foods, and we eat more when there's a variety of foods. So starting with these really simple things, we said we will redesign a program around these principles. A program that will minimize willpower, because people will be eating in ways that are working with their basic food drives rather than against them. We will emphasize retraining the brain so people learn to like healthy food more and unhealthy food less. And then we will relegate exercise for health rather than weight loss, because there's about 100 studies that show that exercise has almost no effect on weight loss. And these are the results that we got. We had a series of 4 trials which ended up with editorials and a lot of media publicity. First of all, this approach was uniquely effective in a randomized controlled trial in Boston. It was 6 times more effective than previous similar studies in the same kinds of populations, 2 to 3 times more effective than other community programs. So these are really big differences. It was sustainable. It was the only program shown to actually reduce hunger and cravings during weight loss. Our people are less hungry during weight loss than they previously were when they were gaining weight. It's healthy, and you get very rapid changes in 6 months. And so these are very big claims. So I thought that I would talk about a couple of things around them. We put some people in a brain scanner to look at changes in the activation of their reward center. And again, these were blinded studies in a collaboration with MGH. And we saw significant evidence of people increasing their preference for healthy foods and decreasing their preference for junk food. So it wasn't just what people reported. We could actually see that in brain scans too. This is some participant experiences going through the program.
Delicious. That was delicious. Yeah.
These 3 workers at the Museum of Science are from different departments, but they all have something in common: weight loss success.
This program is the first time in my life that I really believe that this is the way it's going to be for the rest of my life.
Jennifer Sullivan lost 70 pounds in 1 year on a science-based weight loss program called iDiet.
You know how I used to eat? I wouldn't have breakfast and lunch. I'd go home. If we had a pizza, I'd eat a whole pizza.
But Steve Monaco was able to change those habits, losing 60 pounds during the 12-week program and even more after it was over.
So just in the same way that our malnutrition work based on neurobiology was working better, the same thing is true here. Neurobiology programs just seem to work better, period. And they're reversing damage, and they're giving benefits quickly. So where do we go from here? We're calling this Nutrition for One World Initiative for now. It's a temporary name. But we recognize that we have to massively scale these programs to make a difference. I can study 50 people in my lab, and the only lives I've impacted are 50 people. So we do have to now move on to scaling. For weight management, that means making plans for a free or a low-cost platform based on the program. It means continually improving the program and cultural adaptations. For malnutrition, we want to do further testing. We've really done pilot work at this point, and we're going back with larger plans. I'd like to showcase Guinea-Bissau for rapid educational advances through a combination of educational enrichment and nutrition. The cognitive results indicate we can do that, so we're working with the Global LIC group. The World Health Organization also heard about our results through the grapevine, and they're very excited, and we're talking to them too. And we're hoping that this will also become a life-transforming opportunity for Tufts undergraduates to go and experience what living in a subsistence farming community for a short while would be. So thank you very much.